Regarding Men, Episode 24, Sicko-Therapy, that is feminist therapy. Can hatred be healing?
Welcome, everyone. This is number 24 of Regarding Men. That's 24 of these guys. And I'm here today, as usual, with my accomplice, Paul Elam from A Voice for Men and Janice Fiamengo from the Fiamengo Files. And we're going to talk today about psychotherapy. Yeah, that's right. Not psychotherapy, but psychotherapy. And we're going to focus on feminist psychotherapy. And why are we saying that like that? Well, I want you to think about this. I've studied a lot of theories before, Freud and Jung and behaviorism and thises and that's, and they all have something in common. They all have something in common. That's something in common they have is they find a way to help someone understand what their responsibility is in their behavior so that they can make a change in some way, right? But feminist therapy takes a huge leap away from that idea because feminist therapy doesn't hold women accountable. It says they're victims of this patriarchy thing, and that's their problem. What a horrible start for any form of therapy to start out by saying, oh, well, gosh, it's not your fault. It's not, because therapy is about helping people understand where they are, what's keeping them from getting more joy and from being with Barney and going with that, and you can't do that if you automatically assume someone's a victim and they have no responsibility whatsoever. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, man, of feminist psychotherapy and what's wrong with it. Tell me, guys, what do you think? What else is wrong with feminist psychotherapy?
Oh, gosh, let me count the ways.
Mm-hmm.
It is, well, primary among many problems is the idea of ideologically driven mental health services. What they're saying essentially is, I'm going to treat you according to my political agenda,
Right.
Not toward your mental health problems, not toward the betterment of your life. And of course, they project that, well, if they were feminists, their life would be better. Of course, I've got, 10,000 angry, screaming, miserable feminists on my radar to prove otherwise. But aside from that anecdotally, the golden rules of therapy, these sacrosanct rules that we have, are that you meet people where they're at in life and you
Yes.
empathize with where they are at. It is about your client, you asshole. It's about your client. It is not about you. It's not about your political philosophy. I don't get to start. I'm a big Donald Trump fan. I don't get to start Trumpian psychotherapy.
Right.
That doesn't work. I mean, it might. But no, nobody would seriously consider that, nor would they consider Republican therapy or Democrat therapy. Well, the Democrats might try to get away with that.
Make yourself great again.
Yes, make yourself great again. I'm sorry, sloganeering in therapy is kind of a bad idea. But the fact of the matter is that the job of the therapist is to meet people where they're at, to understand, to give them unconditional positive regard, to assess and figure out where is it your client wants to get to in life, and then become an asset to them in getting to that place in life. That has nothing to do with indoctrinating people into your political beliefs. And as a matter of fact, it is the grossest violation of ethics to do this. And yet we have an entire mental health industry out there now bragging about doing this, bragging about abusing their clients and misleading them and taking their money at very vulnerable times in their lives. Think about when people come to therapy. They come with a lot broken in their lives. Most often, they're looking desperately for answers. They're unhappy, they're miserable, they want change. They want an escape from the lives that they're living. And these therapists take people when they're that vulnerable, that willing to listen because they're desperate for answers, and they prey on them like predators in order to push their political agenda. These people, I don't have words for how disgusting I find these people. And that's why we at Regarding Men here started the Sicko-Therapist of the Month award because we need to start naming and shaming these god-awful clinicians that are abusing vulnerable people in order to push their political agenda. I find it horrible.
Yeah. And if you don't believe that the political is a part of the feminist therapy agenda, just read in Psychology Today where they say feminist therapy is not only personal, but like feminism, political in nature.
Mm-hmm. Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't hide it. They're not talking about just taking a few insights from feminist theory, which in itself would be problematic anyway, but they're talking about applying the entire political philosophy. And that is so worrisome. And of course, we've seen all of these people, they've come through university, they've been trained to regard this as the preeminent lens of truth through which to sift every experience and every individual psychology that they encounter. And it's just horrifying when you read something like, and this was based on the web profile of a particular feminist psychotherapist, who says that she defines feminist therapy, which is how she treats all of her clients. She defines it as, quote, the practice of therapy informed by feminist political philosophies and analysis, grounded in multicultural feminist scholarship on the psychology of women, men, and gender, which leads both therapist and client towards strategies and solutions advancing feminist resistance, transformation, and social change.
Exactly.
That it's unbelievable to think that as a therapist, as you both said, dealing with somebody who's in a life crisis or who is recognizing that there's something about the way they have devised their own personal strategies for dealing with other people and for dealing with their own anxieties or neuroses or unhappiness, to take that person and to think that person should be in some way enlisted into this program for social change, it's just remarkable. And to think that wouldn't mean that the therapist is, it's just this rigid grid that is applied over everything. And we know it would mean that the therapist is going to look at women from a particular perspective and men from the diametrically opposed perspective, and that all of her analysis and assumptions is going to be shaped by where you fall in the rigid victim hierarchy that feminist philosophy has already laid out for her. She talks about one particular person that we were looking at her profile. She talks about how what she wants to do is empower individuals. And I just wondered, what does that mean for men when she counsels them? Is she interested in empowering men, or would empowering men actually mean that she would get them to think about renouncing their privilege and their sense of entitlement and their toxicity and all of these other things that she would assume they bring into her office as men, if she even does? I wondered whether this particular feminist psychotherapist is even interested in counseling men.
Well, I think by individuals, she means women.
Probably, yeah.
They do couples therapy.
Yeah, and she did talk about, gay men, for instance. So I can imagine what she would have to say to a gay white man who, might want to talk about a whole host of issues. I'm sure she'd be very interested in talking about his privilege as a white man and how he needs to confront and analyze that. It's quite extraordinary to imagine the kinds of conversations that would go on in an office when someone comes in saying, I have this huge problem, I'm fearful about talking to people at work, and she instead wants to talk about revolutionary feminist transformations. Astounding. And this is
I'm working on saying good morning to my boss. Can we?
Yeah. Often when you go to therapy, You go because you need really practical, workable solutions for dealing with something huge in your personal life that's preventing you from being able to interface with the world in a productive way. And instead she's bringing all this ideological baggage into the room.
Yep.
And imagine how this plays out when you look at, let's take marriage and family therapy as an example. She did mention couples counseling, marriage and family therapy in her write-up. Her name is Laura Brown, by the way. And you'll find her profile at regardingmen.com linked below. But let's take, there's all different kinds of problems show up at couples counseling. You can have alcoholic abusive men, alcoholic abusive women. You can have any kind of marital dysfunction, infidelity, all sorts of things, financial dysfunction, all sorts of other problems. But let's take a couple. Let's say a man is codependent, very heavily codependent, and he's with an abusive borderline wife who is not only abusing him, but abusing their children. And he goes into marriage and couples, marriage and family therapy, and before they ever have their butts in the chairs in that office, the therapist has them pegged as an abusive patriarchal male, pushing his patriarchal power into the home, and the woman as the victim. Keep in mind, this particular woman, not all women, but in this case that I'm using, the woman is abusive to the man and abusive to her children. The therapist will never see it. The therapist will have decided right up front that she is the victim in this situation, and that what we need to do is tag team between the therapist and the wife to get the man to change and get him to take responsibility for all the dysfunction in the marriage. Now, can you imagine what level of abuse this is on people coming in for help?
It's third-party abuse.
And talk about the children, she leaves them twisting in the wind, where mother will continue to abuse them simply because the therapist cannot entertain the idea that there are women perpetrators.
Yeah, and I would just add one thing to your story, Paul, and that is that I think the therapist would see what she's doing to the children, but she would still blame the man. She's acting out because she's so upset about him, blah, 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 blah. So
Well, yeah, the rationalization
we could change him.
Goes into full swing. It sure does, yes.
Yeah.
If she is physically abusive, it must be self-defense. It must be from years of emotional, psychological abuse.
That's it.
We know their toolbox
Yes.
for these sorts of situations.
We sure do.
But what it ends up with is the therapist becomes the enabling factor in the abuse that's happening in the home. And that is not what therapy is supposed to be about, folks.
Right.
It's the exact opposite.
Yes.
And now the APA is out there bragging about doing this to families.
Yeah, they're overt about it. And they bully any therapist who attempts to do therapy in a different way. Right. As I'm sure you guys know more than I do. I'm remembering a particular case that Bettina Arndt focused on last year that you may remember as well. And I don't know if I now recall all the details, but this was a younger man who was working as a counseling therapist in Australia. And all he did was he posted on his Facebook page, I think, one of Bettina Arndt's articles about domestic violence, making the point that said many times that domestic violence is essentially a two-way street, that it tends to be pretty much 50-50. Most surveys find that men and women report hitting and abusing one another at about equal rates. And in fact, when it's one-way violence, it's more often the woman who's abusing the man than the other way around. And this is something that therapists simply have not faced. This has been covered up for years. All that was his sin. He posted that on his Facebook page, and he was fired from his position.
Wow.
So you not only have patients being abused by ideologically possessed therapists determining that they're going to enact their particular ideology in the counseling office, but you have a few counselors who are, willing to swim against the grain, knowing that they risk their livelihoods in doing so. What a horrible situation.
Yes. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, this type of therapy is literally set to help us only a certain fraction of people. And they actually make claims to this effect, which is mind-blowing. Here's another quote from the Psychology Today article on feminist therapy. Any person or group that has been marginalized, including people of color, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender variant, people in poverty, immigrants, refugees, and people with disabilities, can benefit from feminist therapy. Okay, how about if you're not a member of one of those groups? Are they saying that you would not benefit from feminist therapy? They're not saying that, but I think that's probably true.
Mm-hmm.
And let's get real about one thing. Infantilizing groups of people and making them default victims is not helping them. That's
really.
Absolutely.
And that's what feminism has done to women, and that's what feminist therapy is doing to people. It's just, it's annoying.
Yeah, that whole...
I'll give you an anecdote. This was the summer of '94. It was a year after I first read The Myth of Male Power by Warren. And I was working at a residential facility that this was chemical dependency treatment, and we divided the population up into men and women. And we had contract therapists also come in on campus to do groups. It's all part of how the mental health business is done.
Right.
There's money behind all this.
Right.
And I was talking to a woman before we went in to co-facilitate a group, and she was chain smoking a cigarette, hitting it really heavy and saying, I just love getting men in these groups and shoving their macho bullshit right down their throats. This is a mental health professional.
Right.
And she talked to me about this like past the butter. It was
right.
Absolutely nothing to it.
She assumed you knew what she was talking about.
Absolutely.
And agreed with her.
And complained to the administration. Why are we laying stacks of money on this woman to come in here and do this? And the reaction of my telling them what happened was like, and? What's your point? And guess what, folks? That was '94. It hadn't gotten any better since.
Yeah. In some ways, it's gotten worse.
It's been codified since then. This was back when it was being practiced, but you didn't see it in APA literature and things like that. Now you do. It's you can tell this is an upsetting subject.
It is. Because, therapy is supposed to be something that helps people, not just some people, but the people who come in to seek help. And it's like this has gotten turned on its head. It's completely backwards, and no one says a peep. No, I'll bet the article, that Psychology Today article that I was reading from, I'll bet the comment section, no one says, this is crazy. Everyone goes along with it. Oh, good. You're good for you.
It's good for men to have to confront their privilege, Tom.
How can I forget?
Yeah,
that's what guys seeking therapy are often looking for. It's not that they're in pain or anything like that. It's that they have too much privilege and they need to figure out a way to, oh, good Lord.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's really extraordinary. And just like you were saying, Tom, there is this idea somehow that there's this conviction on the part of all feminists and, most people in general, that in the past, only one perspective was ever valued, and that was the white, male, heterosexual perspective. Right. And therefore, now, and we reject that as a truth anyway. But even if that were true, let's imagine that there were true, and up until 1969 or 1976 or whatever day we want to say when it started to change, let's say that was true, but then why would it be right now to value everything but the white, male, heterosexual perspective? Unless you believe, that you can build a just society based on the principle of collective vengeance.
Yeah, based on bigotry.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous, and yet they can say it as in that Psychology Today article. as in on the website of this woman, this Dr. Laura Brown, and we don't want anyone to write Dr. Laura Brown and, threaten her or anything like that, of course. I mean, in many ways, she's simply channeling the zeitgeist. She's channeling what she was taught and what she has been affirmed for doing all her professional life. Apparently, she charges, according to her website, $4,000 a day to do a group session. You can have her come in to talk to your organization about some issue and pay her $4,000. And obviously, people do pay her for that. So she's getting lots of affirmation and professional reward for bragging about her bigotry. But she also says the same thing. She says that this is a theory, this feminist, multicultural feminist theory, that not only listens to, but privileges the voices and experiences of those who have been defined as other by dominant cultures, which of course are white women, people of color, gays and lesbians, refugees, etc. Why would you think that it is appropriate to privilege and value more than others certain voices simply because you imagine that they were marginalized and oppressed and disadvantaged in the past, or even continue to be, as I'm sure she would argue? But why would that be a justification for that kind of bigotry and discrimination? It clearly is not, and yet that seems to be, that kind of self-reflexive awareness is entirely lacking from all of these highly intelligent, we assume, practitioners in the mental health field. It's really disturbing.
I'd like to take this opportunity to put in my pitch. If you have secured the services of Laura Brown for $5,000 a day to work with your company for a mere $5,000 a day, I will come in and clean up her fucking mess.
That's a great idea, Paul.
I mean, my God, this is, it says it all. And I want to point out too, what Janice said is right. We don't want people harassing this woman at all. But there is also, the truth is that speaking up and speaking to this problem is not harassment. We should be vocal about these therapists. That's why we started the Psychotherapist of the Month at Regarding Men, is because we need to name and shame these people. This is very sick. We're having a laugh at it. You can only laugh at some things. They're so depraved. But we need to speak up.
Yeah, really.
About what's going on in the mental health field.
Yes.
Because it's that terrible.
It's crazy. The other thing that bugs me about this whole feminist therapy thing is the assumption is that previous therapy was built for men.
Yeah.
It's like, no. Previous therapy has been built specifically for women. Because women like to come and tell their story on a verbal level and connect and have eye contact. And that's what graduate schools do. They teach people how to connect and have eye contact and listen to stories, listen to feelings, blah, 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 blah. This is all feminine stuff. Mm-hmm. Traditional therapy has nothing to do with helping men. Jeez. I mean, men feel very awkward in a traditional therapeutic setting.
It's never been a men's market.
No, of course not. Women go. It's like 8-2, 9-1, women to men. But the assumption is that, therapy before there was only for men. It's nutty. It's absolutely insane. That's simply not true.
It is absolutely not true.
Yeah.
But of course, it came from feminists. So,
and therefore it must be true.
Therefore, it's probably not true.
Now, couples therapy. Is there any utility in it at all? Would you recommend, if a man's wife is saying to him, we got problems, we're having trouble communicating, our relationship's falling apart, I want to go to a couples therapist?
Well, I'll make one recommendation about that. Normally, and this is something I have advocated for a long time, I avoid it like the plague. There's no good therapist, almost no good therapist. If you feel like you must go, that you really want to give that a shot before the marriage ends or anything, and you want to reach out for help, ask them what they know about gynocentrism. Ask them what they know about men's issues and the influence of feminism on therapy and whether or not it's been positive or negative. Get answers to that stuff. And if they don't give you the answers that you know you should hear, don't give them a dime. You can find this out in 2 minutes on the phone.
Really?
You don't need to go in for a session for this.
There's a couple of good
I got a
questions.
couple of questions before we ever get started.
Yes.
I want to know. And
How has feminism negatively impacted men? You know, that's
Yes.
one question.
yeah,
And another one is, do men and women process emotions differently? If they say no to that, run like hell.
absolutely. And if you're just on the phone, you don't have to run. You can just hang up.
Yeah, yeah,
Bye. But
yeah.
generally speaking, Janice, my advice to men is to stay out of it, because I know that the deck is stacked against them.
It really is.
It is their marriage therapy does not service functional marriages in these days. What it does is it preaches political ideology. It identifies the man as the problem in the relationship and runs on that assumption. And the more a guy resists that, if he says, wait a minute, she does stuff too, the
Here's the
therapist
problem.
is very likely to jump in and say, see there, here's your problem.
Yeah.
You're not going to get, I'm sorry, you're just not going to get help that way. It's a bum deal. It might have been helpful at one time. I'm not sure. But like Tom said, therapy was always a woman's racket.
Yeah.
It was never really fashioned or conducted around the needs of men. It's why we have so much ignorance about men and therapists. It's amazing how much ignorance there is in the therapy community.
I think, though, that there are some good couples therapists out there. I mean, I'm not saying there aren't any, because I think some are really good. In fact, the situations I've seen that help the most is when you have a man and a woman therapist for one couple, you know, and the man is there to be an advocate for the man and the woman is there to be an advocate for the woman. And you can get some things done with a situation like that. But even in those scenarios, I've seen it over and over again that gynocentrism is dripping down from the ceiling. It's coming down. And I'm telling you, I've seen situations where men have been, you know, they can't walk. You know, they've got an arrow sticking through one side of the cheek and out the other side, and they're blamed. And everyone looks at, well, what's her problem? You know, they won't even listen to what's going on with the guy. It's just unbelievable. And that's gynocentrism. I mean, people are open to the problems of women, and it's something that people want to do. It's a call to action. But the problems of men and a man's pain is taboo.
Here's a
Don't
hint
touch
for you. If your marriage therapist is encouraging you to understand and empathize how hurt your wife was over cheating on you, you're in the wrong scenario.
Over her cheating.
Yes, and I've seen it happen.
I have too, actually. Yeah, I mean, it's just so one-sided. It's hard to believe when you've been red pilled and you look at it and you go, what? Are you kidding? It's just it's hard to believe.
But it happens.
It really hurt her when she stabbed you in the back with that butter knife.
But if you could find a red-pilled couples therapist, I mean, it can be helpful, but they're not easy to find. I did an article that we'll link below on the couples therapy for men. What men need to know before they get into it.
That's a great article, too.
The system is rigged. It's rigged for women, and the therapists are basically in it to help women. And as a man, you got to go in armed. You got to have your weapon at your side, because you're not going to be, you know.
And that is something else to consider, I think, too. Really
weapon?
strongly, when you go in to the therapy, be armed, just like Tom said. Be prepared to make your case, because you can semi-train some therapists as a client. I mean, it's sad to be talking about this, but in effect, you can say, wait a minute, I want you to look at this more clearly. She cheated on me, and you're sitting here asking me to empathize with her feelings about it. What about my feelings?
Yeah.
And if you're ready to assert your boundaries that way, you may find some therapists can be worked with. But I will add on top of that, though, that, you know, $250 an hour is kind of expensive way to be doing OJT for your therapist.
That's true. That's
but
true.
If you're already in, man, start asserting for yourself.
And on top of that,
one more personal example. I had a therapist in marriage therapy try to tell me that I wasn't being very open. The idea was based on Harvell Hendricks' work, and you're supposed to tell your partner, no matter what they say, that they make sense. And that was Hendricks. He wrote a series of wildly famous and popular books on this.
He's now divorced.
No matter what your partner says, you're supposed to say, that makes sense to me. And if you do that enough, the problem will go away, which is utter bullshit. And I told the therapist, so in other words, you're telling me I need to lie. And
yes.
It sounds like you're being not very open. And I said, okay, so now you're trying to shame me because I don't want to lie. And we gave up on that therapy, and she gave up on me, but that's what was supposed to happen.
Paul, you're not a good consumer.
No, I'm a misbehaving client.
And the Hendricks stuff, if it truly went both ways, it might be helpful. But here's what happens. They force him to listen to her, but they don't do it the other way around. They don't. Oh my God. I mean, I've seen that before where, he's got to sit there and agree with everything she says, even though he doesn't believe it. But it doesn't go both ways. Crazy.
No.
And Hendricks is now...
They give him a chance to talk, and then they say, but you really don't have any complaints, do you?
Well, that's about right. That's about right. And I think Hendricks is divorced now, Paul.
Yes, he is divorced, and I understand that she took him for many, many large stacks of money.
Yeah.
And I feel terribly sorry for him.
Really? He's a good man, I'm sure.
And this is reflected also. We should probably add to this. You look at people like John Gray, who wrote Women Are From Venus, Men Are From Mars. If you look at, and I read that POS book a couple of times because I couldn't believe it, but he has a section in there on the things that men should do and women should do to maintain a happy relationship. Mm-hmm. Every one of the things men should do involved jewelry, vacations, expensive clothing, nice presents, romantic evenings, paying lots of attention to her, on to those 10 things. Now, the 10 things women were obligated to do to maintain a happy relationship was to say thank you. And then to say thank you. And then number 3 was to say thank you some more. He wrote this stuff with a straight face.
Oh, no. Mm-hmm. No.
And this is the brand of thinking that has always been in couples therapy and psychotherapy.
Yeah, it's kind of centric.
Women first, men last every time.
Yes, and that's not just in psychotherapy, it's with the culture in general. So it's pretty natural that it would just flow out of that. Because that's what our culture does. I mean, gynocentrism runs silent and it runs deep. It's every place you look, and you can't see it until you've been red-pilled. You can't see it.
And then you can't unsee it.
And then, exactly.
Oh, man, isn't that the truth?
Hardly see anything else.
Oh, God. Yeah. It's so true.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Well, I guess we better wind this one up.
Yeah, good.
Get really miserable.
Ever on a happy note.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well,
so
why
we
don't we start? Actually,
go ahead, Janice. We were going to give our humanitarian award to a surprising person, really the father of modern psychotherapy, I guess.
Paul, tell us why.
Well, here's my contention about Freud, and I know a lot of people, their hairs will stand up on the back of their neck when you say Freud for a humanitarian award. He's certainly an imperfect man with a lot of imperfection in his theories. But one thing you cannot deny about Freud, no matter what you think of psychoanalytic theory or what you think of his life as a man or his views of women or his views of using cocaine, he did give us an ethical responsibility toward childhood, the first human being in our history to assert an ethical responsibility to how we raise our children, how we treat our children, helping us understand for the first time. And this is, like in the past 150 years, for the first time, what abuse is and the consequences of it for adults, and understanding there's a connection between the way a child is treated and how they turn out as an adult. I'm ever thankful for Freud for that, because I think that really is the foundation of modern therapy and will remain so for a long time. So I have no problem with the humanitarian award for him.
Go, Sigmund, go.
Okay. I never thought of him in those terms.
I hadn't thought of it quite like that either. That's a very good point, and I agree 100%, man. Good. So who gets the PUTA?
Well, I think Dr. Laura Brown is our
Dr. Laura.
Yeah.
She's going to come flying in no time, I'm sure.
The PhD stands for PUTA, high and deep.
Yeah.
That's good. I like that. Oh, there she goes.
There
it is.
Thank goodness. Get rid of her.
It's a sad thing to see a psychotherapist reflecting at length and with pride on her website about how she has to, be self-conscious about her own blind spots and biases and cultural context, etc., and yet never questioning the prejudices and bigotry built into a feminist framework.
Yeah. Indeed.
She gets it.
She gets it, and she's out.
And you can read more about it. We did a write-up at regardingmen.com, link below. Go there. And while you're there, if you're one of the 7 or 8 people on the planet who has not signed up for our mailing list, our newsletter, please sign up and join the rest of the human race.
Yeah.
Your regular dose of information about what's going on in the world of men and boys on a platform that nobody controls but us.
Yes. And there's content on the newsletter that you will not find anyplace else. So come on and join us. Good stuff. Good stuff.
Okay.
Are we out?
That's it.
That's good. Y'all take care.
There's something about men.
Oh, men are good, as are you. Yeah. Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you. Thanks, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate the reminder.